I'm going to be talking about Islam and Muslims and Muslim heritage as it's being represented in the media. And I'm going to talk about it from two perspectives. And you can see my slide up here. I'm going to try and draw a line under one of them. Because as Halima said to me earlier on, we want to focus on a particular area here. And the first one I want to draw a line on is right up here. So every day, there's source material for this discussion about the representation of Islam and Muslims in the media. And you can see right here, the Sun was ordered to admit that British Muslim story that they printed was significantly misleading. And that's the one I kind of want to draw a line under, because we could talk about that all day. We could potentially talk about it all night and into next week. But we're going to draw a line underneath it because, simply as a media teacher, I can tell you that if I do an audit with my students on the newspapers from that day, it confirms the fact that there's an imbalance there. Okay? So that's not something I want you to talk about today. What I want you to talk about, I'm going to allude to with the stories that I've brought over from the time I spent in the US. And it's not obviously British Islamic history, but there are obvious parallels between our community here and the American community over there. I want you to take a look at this picture over here. That is the oldest mosque in the United States of America. And not a single person I came across in the US knew that. Even the people who now run it had no idea until I turned up. I kid you not. They thought they might be the oldest in Brooklyn, they said to me. And when I dropped it on them, two things happened. The first thing was, the young girl who's in charge, who is a third generation descendant of the original Baltic Muslims that set this up, white Muslims, who are actually part of the most ancient Muslim community in Europe, which is how I ended up there, because I was actually exploring the Baltic Muslims in the Baltic this summer with my wife and my two girls here. And it was this story that led me there. When I explained to them that they were the oldest, two things happened. The young girl in charge got very excited. And then straight away, she started to look worried, because she had a much older community that felt very attached to this place. This wasn't just a mosque for them. This was home when they arrived in the US. This is where somebody looked after them. And those of us from the Bangladeshi community who have looked at stories like I have about the importance of certain buildings, of certain mosques when we first arrived, or when our forefathers first arrived, they weren't just mosques. They were a connection back to where we came from. They were far more important. But that's not the main reason why they were so wary of a BBC journalist coming along and wanting to expose this mosque to the world. What they were worried about goes straight back to this. Most of them look like white Americans. Most of them today don't overtly identify themselves as Muslim. And there's a reason for that. We all know what that is. It's not the most pleasant thing if they go around telling everybody they're Muslim. The backlash they get, the kind of comments they have made are just shocking, given what's going on in America, which I don't need to educate you on. So the biggest concern that came about was the fact that they were worried about being identified as Muslims, and they were worried about their building being identified as a mosque. And their biggest question to me was, what will this mean? And I had to be honest with them, I didn't know. But I said to them, I can tell you what it means for America. And it means an education into their own heritage. This isn't Muslim heritage, this is American Muslim heritage. It's more than just about the Baltic Muslims now. It's greater than anything they could have imagined, whether they like that or not. And eventually, a handful of them agreed. And we spent ages going through the old cupboards, finding chalkboards where her grandfather had last written a lesson and the Arabic was still there, and I was absolutely petrified of touching it in case it came off. And she was worried about how she's going to preserve it, cling film, when all these ideas came to head. But anyway, let's have a look at this picture here as well. And this is why it's so important. Down here it says American Mohammedan Society and United American Mohammedan Friends. Not a single person I came across had the faintest that these institutes existed. Now it's a black and white picture, but even if that was in full colour, I'm sure those of you that come up and have a look will see that it just looks like a group of Americans on a day out. Because that's what it was. That was taken in 1949. That was about 15 to 20 years after that mosque was established in 1934. So that's the first story I want you to think about when you consider why it's so important that we look at Muslim heritage and you consider the impact the media is having or isn't having. Now the other side of it, the plus side, how did I find out about it? Well, I found out about it because of the beauty of something called social media. I had no idea. There was no article written on it. It just so happened that I was doing what most people do, throwing terms into a search engine. And I hit upon this very obscure WordPress blog that an academic had written somewhere. And he alluded to the fact that there might be a mosque somewhere in Brooklyn that was built in the 1930s. And that's what started my journey. So we have the pros and the cons of the media right there. Now I'm going to tell you my second story, which isn't up here. As a Bangladeshi, or British Bangladeshi, because we're obviously dealing with identities here. As a British Bangladeshi, one of the things I wanted to do as well is I wanted to go and explore the Bangladeshi community in New York, because some of you here will be aware that after Tower Hamlets in London, it's New York that has the second largest Bangladeshi migrant community in the world. So it was going to be easy, wasn't it? I phoned a few friends before I left, and I said to them, look, I just want to go into a Bangladeshi mosque. I just want to talk to them. Talk about integration, talk about bridging communities, cultures, identities. And he said, yeah, that's fine, no problem, crack on. I got to Iowa for my first stop, and the person whose phone number I'd been given just kept ringing. No answer. I got to Washington, he still hadn't answered. So I started to panic a little bit. I've taken all this money off the BBC, I need to do something. And so I had a good friend in Washington who said to me, don't worry, I've got an individual who lives in Jamaica, not the country, Jamaica, New York. He knows a fantastic Bangladeshi mosque. He'll sort you out. So I rang him, and I rang him again, and I rang him again. What was happening in both incidents was when the individual was making the introduction, because they know them on a personal level, they're like, oh yeah, don't worry, bro, yeah, we'll sort it out. BBC, yeah, no problems. But then the reality sank in. I'm going to be projected across the globe as a Muslim. I'm going to expose my mosque to the world. And right now, I don't know how that's going to be perceived. So again, panic. On the way from LaGuardia, I'm panicking, my producer's panicking. And of course, the taxi driver was a Bangladeshi, because they all are. And so I said to him, in my absolutely awful Sylheti stroke Dhaka Bengali, I said to him, look, I kind of want to go to a mosque. It's Friday, Jummah and all that. I tried the kind of subtle approach. He said to me, yeah, of course, yeah, come along. So after we'd had this discussion and he invited me along to his mosque, I then recorded a moment in the taxi, and he kind of said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just recording something for the radio because I'm here for the radio. And he went, oh, okay. And he carried on as though he was happy with this. The next day I called him and he answered the phone, but he was driving, and it was quite apparent he was driving. And he said to me, call me back in about 10 minutes. And I'm not going to tell you what happened next, because you know what happened next. So there we are, no mosque. And I'm in New York, and it's the last day. So I said, look, we're just going to have to go for it. We're just going to turn up at a mosque, and we're just going to attend the Jummah prayer. We're going to do what we're going to do, and then we're going to try and engage with these people. And if not, that's a story we can tell as well. Sure, so we ended up in being a Sylheti Bangladeshi. I looked up Shah Jalal, the most obvious, and we found a masjid there called the Hazrat Shah Jalal Mosque, which was actually one of the largest mosques in Astoria, New York. Turned up, went in, prayed, finished, approached the imam, and you could see straight away the apprehension. But he also felt obliged, he was on the spot. And I felt a little bit bad for doing that. But I explained to him why I was here. I explained to him that I'm trying to represent Muslims in a positive light. I explained to him that we don't have enough Muslims in the media doing this. We don't have enough non-Muslims in the media doing this. The media is a business. It needs to sell stories. And good Muslim stories don't always sell papers. So I said this to him, and in the end, he agreed. And he sat down with the committee, and we spoke. And then I accosted a young man who was leaving the mosque as well and asked him if he would speak to me. And again, there was apprehension. But again, he agreed. This was because I had imposed on them. But also because I'd had the time to explain to them what my real agenda was. Because that's what they're all interested in. What's the agenda here? They would use that word. I'm a media teacher. I've been doing this a long time. It wasn't anything I didn't expect. So I knew what to tell them. And then I sat with a young man, and we had a wonderful conversation, and everything he said echoed my own experiences as a British Bangladeshi Muslim, trying to work out what it means to be British, what it means to be Bangladeshi, and now what it means to be Muslim. And in the end, we got the show done. And the show was a great success. And I had comments come from all over the world telling me how grateful they were that somebody had bothered to do something positive. But I also had comments come from all over the world, from Muslims and non-Muslims, telling me that what I was doing was wrong. And so I want you to have a think about that when we have this discussion. Thank you.